Hi, everyone. It's really great to be here. It's really amazing what everybody in this room has done and your contributions to research and trying to move the field forward. What I thought I'd do today is not talk so much about the specific research, but a little bit about the drug development process. I'm not a drug development expert per se, but I think it's really important for everybody to understand how important academic research is in collaborating with pharmaceutical companies to try to get new drugs to patients and improve outcomes. So, and I think that this group has made such an impact on that and will continue to make such an impact on that. I wanted to sort of emphasize why that's so important today. So I have a couple examples, but I think I'm just going to talk about one example from our lab where we've struggled to get the project forward, and then give you some examples of where collaborations have really been successful in sarcoma research. So the details on this slide are really not that important, but a bunch of years ago we showed that two combinations of compounds that are not drugs yet were sort of work together to impact Ewing sarcoma in our models. So this isn't in patients, this is in cells growing in culture. In one example, you can see the red line on the bottom just doesn't go up as much as the black lines. And what that really just means is that the cells aren't really growing when they're exposed to these two compounds compared to the other lines. The dotted lines are the two compounds alone, and then in combinations, the red lines. So when you combine these two compounds, the Ewing sarcoma cells in culture grow slower. That doesn't mean it's going to work in patients, right? So, and then on the left side of the slide, you can see what we use here are mouse models where we take the cancer cells and we grow them like a tumor in the mouse and give the mouse the drugs and see if it's effective. And you can see that the red line just shows that the mice who received the two compounds survived longer with this implanted tumor. Most of us think of those second experiments as sort of fuzzy test tubes. So a lot of these experiments give us some hope that we have something that might be effective for Ewing sarcoma, but until we get to a clinical trial with patients, we really don't know. And most of the time when you see curves like this, we do an early phase trial and we don't see a signal. So part of the point of showing you this slide is to say we actually need many early phase clinical trials to get a home run. The chances that this particular story would have ended in a home run are pretty small, but one of the issues that we ran into is that one of the drugs is one of the compounds is supposed to inhibit a protein called FAK, and the details of that are not that important, but just to say that this company Veristem, which is located in Cambridge near Boston, has a compound that inhibits this target. But their trials have been going on for some time. So this is a slide I stole, image I stole from their website from 2018. And so far, this compound has not been a home run in any cancer they've been trying on. So until it becomes a drug that's FDA approved for a cancer type, it's very hard to convince them to give us a compound for a clinical trial in a rare pediatric bone cancer. There are other examples I had on some slides, but so this is just one area where we've sort of gotten an interesting idea, wasn't likely to be a home run, but we haven't really been able to bring it into clinical trial. Now, I think if this drug does move forward, we will have a shot at doing that. But a lot of times what ends up happening in the pharmaceutical industry is they have a great idea, they have a great drug, but it doesn't actually induce an outcome that they're looking for, and so they stop developing it. So we don't know what's going to happen with that agent, but we're waiting. So why is it so tricky to ask drug companies to make drugs specifically for what I'm interested in is pediatric sarcomas, rare sarcomas, bone tumors? And it's because of, this is an oversimplification, but it's really because of this equation. There's few patients, so in the long term, there's a small market, and pharmaceutical company is a business, and they need to be able to sell their drug once they make it. And every time they make a drug, it's extremely high risk. So to go from an idea where you have a target to find a chemical that inhibits that target, all the way to a drug that patients can tolerate and shows improved outcome, it's tens to hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's very high risk for them to sort of try to take that on. And probably 90% of their efforts don't result in a successful drug that can go to market. So when you put a small market together with a high risk, it's a challenging business model for pharmaceutical companies. Now, that's the depressing part of my presentation. The rest of what I'm going to show you, I think, is a way to make you feel better about this, because what we can do is help, as academic researchers, we can help industry like have a more favorable model. And so how can we do that? So one of the ways, there's three ways that, again, oversimplifying, but I think there's three major ways that we can sort of help de-risk and improve that equation. So one of them is if there's an existing target with where agents are already coming through the pipeline at a pharmaceutical company, if we can find those exact targets in a rare cancer that we work on, like a bone sarcoma, then we can significantly de-risk the entire equation for pharmaceutical companies. We can actually do a lot of work to bring a compound to sort of validate how to use a compound, which also, that's bullet point 2 here, that can also really help pharmaceutical companies de-risk development. And then we can take approved drugs, which basically skips pharma altogether, take approved drugs and show that they work in a pediatric cancer or a bone sarcoma that we're interested in. And that means we can sort of skip the pharma equation altogether. So I just want to show you like one example of each of these, and then hopefully we could have a little bit of a discussion with the audience about this. So this is a massively successful home run in NTRK-fused cancers. So this is a protein that gets broken up and rearranged and drives a subset of cancers. They're mostly rare cancers. I'm showing you data from one of the very first clinical trials that tried these NTRK inhibitors in paediatrics. There's already pretty strong evidence that these inhibitors are going to work for this particular genetic vulnerability in the laboratories. So everybody was very excited about this trial, and it was clearly a home run. This is called the waterfall plot. So what you're looking at here is how tumors are progressing. And on the left are patients who got this medicine who didn't have the genetic vulnerability that this medicine was supposed to target. And you can see their tumor progressed, going up. And then all the patients with infantile fibrosarcoma and soft tissue sarcoma whose tumor was characterized by this fusion had a massive response. And this is now a drug that's far into development. It's already approved for patients who've had progressive NTRK mutated cancers, and now is being brought up into upfront therapy. So if we can help, this is bullet point 1, if we can help companies find targets in rare cancers that they're already developing a drug for, then we can have a massive impact. And one of the things that's helping us in the US is this RACE Act. So it's called Research to Accelerate Cures and Equity for Children Act. And what it does is if a drug company is developing a drug that has a very specific target, and that target is relevant in a pediatric cancer, then they actually have to include in their FDA application a plan to validate it as a potential drug for that pediatric cancer. So if it's a drug that has no relevance at all to pediatric cancer, then they can get a waiver, but otherwise they have to try to develop it in a pediatrics indication. So this is helping us a lot in the US. So how can we further de-risk development? Well, this is another story that comes from a good friend, Patrick Grohar, who's an investigator who focuses on Ewing sarcoma. And he's been working on this idea for a long time that trabectedin actually affects the way the translocation in Ewing sarcoma, EWS fly, it sort of inhibits its activity so that the cancer is no longer being activated by the translocation and the cells die. So this is sort of another way to sort of directly inhibit the main driver of Ewing sarcoma. And his initial work had showed really good evidence that it was sort of impacting the cancer and really worked. And then the first clinical trials didn't really show efficacy. So that was sort of discouraging. It would have been easy to stop there. But Patrick then went on to show that it's actually really matters how you deliver this drug, meaning how often you dose it, about whether it responds, whether the Ewing sarcoma tumors will respond or not to this target, to this agent. So with all this painstaking work done in an academic lab, he was then able to convince the drug company again to try a trial specifically in Ewing sarcoma, together with SARC, which is a multi-institutional collaboration in the United States that runs clinical trials for sarcomas, including bone sarcomas. And this study is now underway. So this is a clinical, like a massive success story, at least in the terms of getting this drug de-risked by showing how, in an academic research lab, how it could be better delivered to impact outcomes, and now is resulting in a clinical trial. And we'll see. Hopefully there'll be positive outcomes from the study. But this is sort of, if we can't get here, we can't get anywhere. And so this is one of the steps we really need to get to. And we can also repurpose existing drugs. And this is an example from a few studies out of Europe where these VEGF inhibitors, there wasn't really preclinical data. There wasn't necessarily mouse data or cell culture data to show that these tyrosine kinase inhibitors, VEGF inhibitors, would have impact in Ewing sarcoma. But since they were an approved drug, academic clinical researchers were able to convince the drug companies to do a clinical trial in Ewing sarcoma and also osteosarcoma, actually. And in those trials, these compounds looked very promising, and now these are being incorporated into new large clinical trials in Europe and in the United States to see if they'll have an impact in osteosarcoma and Ewing sarcoma. So there is a lot of hope, but it takes a lot of academic collaboration. I think that's really important. And then one other thing I wanted to tout, I have no relationship to Day One Pharmaceuticals other than I know Sam. He's kind of a friend. But this is a company that was started by Sam Blackman, who's a pediatric oncologist, and he'd been in industry for a long time and was somewhat frustrated by some of the roadblocks that we've been discussing today. We talked a lot about yesterday at our Ewing sarcoma research-oriented sessions. And so he decided he was just going to start a new company. And so what their main focus is to try to take things out there that never really made it to drugs, but were really promising and looked like they had a real modality specifically for rare cancers, including pediatric cancers, and to try to use a pharmaceutical model that does have a business plan to try to bring those drugs to market. And so a lot of us are rooting really hard for Sam because we think that this could be a paradigm switch in the field. Because if he can show that this is profitable, then we can build on that model, I think, and more companies will take up this approach. So there's a lot of hope out there, and there's ways to do it. One of the things I work on is liquid biopsies. So these are an approach to take blood samples from patients with cancer and learn more about their cancer, track how they're responding, early detection for relapse. And it's a rapidly evolving field. One of the challenges we've had in pediatric cancers and sarcomas in general is that a lot of these tests are optimized for carcinomas, so breast cancer and lung cancer and colon cancer. And so not all the tests are well suited for the diseases we see. When they are, it's not necessarily in the company's business model to focus on the bone cancer indication. So we've decided to just sort of plow ahead. And so we've got, for example, Foundation Medicine has a test that actually is applicable to Ewing sarcoma. So we've partnered with them, and we're helping to run a biomarker-based trial to see if their assay works as well as some of the research homegrown assays that we've developed in my lab, so that we can let the community know whether this is a test that should help their doctors make decisions, because we need data for that. And so our partnership with a pharmaceutical company hopefully will move this forward and make a big impact. And then where there isn't a commercial test that is available. We've been sort of developing some of our own, and we hope that if we can de-risk those liquid biopsy tests enough, we'll be able to get someone to take it up and commercialize it to make it available to patients. So that's what I had for presentations today, but I'd love to open it up for discussion. I think the summary is that, the rarity of bone cancers and other sarcomas makes drug development challenging, but there are paths to accelerating these efforts, and they really rely on academic collaboration and some non-industry funding. And there's a lot of work going on to bring new therapies to patients with rare cancers. And I'm really excited about the future, but I think just to really emphasize what a massive impact the people in this room have, because without groups like this, there's really no way for us to do the research that de-risks everything for pharma so that we can bring new therapies to patients with bone cancers. Happy to take any questions.
Hi, Brian. There's no such thing as a silly question.
No, none.
There certainly isn't. Great, thanks very much for that overview. And completely agree, of course, we're on the same page here, aren't we? And just, we are trying to build these collaborations, not just across Europe, but also reaching out across to the USA and the UK. Just for people in the room, in case you don't know, it's great to hear about the RACE initiative in the USA, but we do have such an initiative in Europe and the UK. So pharma bringing new agents to market have to investigate a new agent within a paediatric cancer of some type. So we're kind of on the same strategy there as well. So industry does have to do that across Europe and the UK if they're bringing a new agent to the market. So we're not behind there. We actually are in front, I think. But it's increasing the collaboration that's important.
It's really important.